Well, what are the options now for the United States? George Joffe, Middle East expert, has joined me. George, you heard the President say there, make no mistake, the US will hunt down and punish those responsible. When you look at what has happened, a handful of people on 4 planes, who are they going to look for?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because there may only have been a handful of people, but they were on 4 planes, and that required 4 pilots. It required backup crews, all prepared to sacrifice themselves for the sake of hitting these targets. Now, the real question, it seems to me, is whether or not the groups that are the obvious targets, particularly bin Laden, have the skills necessary and could have got through American airport security to get on the planes themselves. My fear is that the Americans will take the shortcut to assuming that it is bin Laden, and they will therefore try to attack bases connected with him or even he himself.
Now, they've done this before, after the 2 attacks on the embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam 3 years ago, and they had a very high-profile attack in Khartoum with cruise missiles. Did they hit the right targets? They
certainly didn't. They then hit a chemical factory that they claimed was involved, and they destroyed it. The owner demonstrated that he was not connected to bin Laden and actually sued the United States for compensation, which he in fact obtained. They also attacked camps inside Afghanistan, but they certainly didn't hit bin Laden.
So the Americans have now admitted or conceded essentially that they hit the wrong target because they claim that bin Laden had been using that factory and they found traces in the drainage ducts.
I'm afraid they didn't concede that. The case is not yet decided. They are still denying that in fact it was the wrong target. So there are certainly going to be great problems over the United States admitting that it should have made a mistake of this kind.
Now, we had the USS Cole last year. Are there fingerprints? Are there email traces? Are there electronic traces? Are there paper traces? Is there a trail of any kind which does inevitably lead to one person?
No, there aren't. And one of the problems is a question of coordination between the security services of different states. Both in Saudi Arabia over the Al-Khobar bombing and in Yemen over the USS Cole bombing, the local authorities resented very much the presence of the FBI, and there was as a result a lot of friction. So the evidence was never fully exchanged. And in fact, in the case of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabia government rejected the American claims of an Iranian involvement, and in the case of Yemen, the Yemeni authorities found their own criminals who they then tried themselves. So we don't know whether in those previous cases there were proper electronic traces.
You seem to be suggesting that you have fears that America will respond in a very decisive way without necessarily the evidence to back up the reason for hitting the targets they're likely to hit.
I fear that could be the case. It's tended to be the case in the past. Now, on this occasion, there are already hints from the United States that American officials are saying that there are indications that bin Laden was involved, and we know from a London source that Arab sources believe that bin Laden was planning a spectacular attack on the United States. But that's very flimsy evidence on which to move forward.
But I have to say, sitting there was Stephen Simon 3 hours ago, who used to be in the counterterrorism department at the White House, and he was saying they did foil a mass attack on 12 jumbo jets over the Pacific, which they traced back to bin Laden.
Well, I'm sure they foiled such an attack. We don't know the details of the way in which the tracings were carried out. And one needs to be very careful over these things. There have been a series of arrests, for example, in Europe, and extradition proceedings back to the United States, some of which have not succeeded because the evidence was too flimsy. And then we have the classic example of the Lockerbie case, where American evidence there was shown to be completely wanting, with the result that one of the defendants was actually found not guilty.
Do you feel uneasy, even talking like this 5.5 hours, 6 hours after the event, given what happened in Oklahoma City with Timothy McVeigh? Everyone immediately looked to the Middle East.
Yes, I do feel very uncomfortable. And I have to say that although there appear to be strong pressures indicating the Middle East, I still don't feel convinced. One of the reasons is that this attack originated on American territory. It required people to penetrate American security in a country that is acutely sensitive about the Middle East. And it required also enormous coordination. I find that really very difficult to understand.
We now have new images from downtown New York City, looking almost as if a typhoon or hurricane has hit the place, and one can only imagine the most appalling kind of wind and horror. I mean, it looks like a nuclear attack. But let's remember that, was it 5 years ago, that there was a similar attack on the World Trade Center, and the trail has already led to courtrooms, which has led to bin Laden, hasn't it?
Oh yes, there was a similar attack. Whether it led to bin Laden or not is not quite certain. It's a little more complicated, I think. The fact was then, though, that the attack was much less sophisticated. It consisted of using chemical fertilizers as a means of making the explosives in a van that was parked in a car park. Now, that had a devastating effect, but it was nowhere near as complex as the attacks today.
But what about the fact that in a lower Manhattan courtroom, there you had several people who were incriminated for the Nairobi and Dar es Salaam bombings, not all of them, but some of them, and in the end, bin Laden kept being mentioned, and here you have New York City being targeted.
Yes. If you're looking for connections in terms of past attacks, certainly you can find connections to the Middle East. They're not necessarily directly to bin Laden. They may be to groups associated with him, particularly to the Jamiat Islamiyah, which was in fact the group said to be behind the World Centre bombings last time.
George, we have to stop there because Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York City, is speaking at this moment.